Hello there, YouTube. This is Mr. Gibson Guy, and welcome back to my channel. If you are new, you haven't ever been here before, welcome. Thanks for joining me here. And if you're not familiar with this, go ahead and hit the like button and hardly going by, and give us a subscribe. It's free to do that. Doesn't cost you anything. The channel is doing really well. We're at like 983 subscribers right now. We're trying to hit 1,000. We got to get 17 more. So the more people that hit subscribe, the less I have to talk about this. But today's subject is not the subscribe button. That's part of it, but there's another part. Today we're looking at an old camera. This is kind of the channel it's turning into for film photography history and camera evaluations. And today we're talking about a very special late model camera, late in the manual focus era, known as the Minolta X700. Yeah, I had one of these cameras way back in the day, and now I have one again these days. I've been getting to relive all the glory of the early film electronic camera days, and get to go through all my favorite cameras from way back then. This is a camera that I just got recently, and I had one back when they first came out. I got one of these cameras, and today I'm going to be going through the story of how this camera was developed by Minolta and how my photographic journey brought me to this camera as well. The Minolta X700, and there was a lot of big things going on when they came out with this. This was a big step forward for Minolta. But let me take you back earlier, because we're going to go back to the beginning and go from there. Not beginning for Minolta, beginning for me with my photographic journey. In college, my roommate had a Nikon camera. This was in the early to mid 70s. And so he showed me how to do a lot of things on his Nikon, and I got used to using that. And then after I graduated and I got a job and was making some money, I decided I needed to get my own camera. And I started, of course, looking at Nikons. But in those days, in the mid to late 70s, Nikons were just very expensive cameras. And I could have afforded it, but it just seemed to me like, that's crazy. Yeah. Now the interesting thing was, shortly after that, Nikon had to lower their prices significantly, and they came much more in line with the other cameras, the Canons and the Minoltas and the Pentax of the day. But at the time that I was shopping, getting a Nikon was an expensive proposition. As you see in the cabinet behind me, I have 8 of them right now, and they're not nearly as expensive. But in those days, in 76, 77, 78, around that time, Nikons were just very expensive and hard to find, hard to get anything, because people were buying them up. Photography was a real big deal. So I broadened my horizons a little bit and looked at other 35mm single lens reflex cameras that were available. And I settled upon the Minolta brand at first. I decided, well, if I'm not going to be able to be a Nikon guy, I think I like Minolta. That looks like a good company. And so I started looking around, and I got myself up to where I was going to get a SRT 201, which was one of the late model SRTs before they were discontinued, and with a 50mm f1.7 Rocore MD lens on it. And this camera was going for a little over $200. I think $215, $220, somewhere around that area at that time. and I was living outside of Jacksonville, but near Jackson, so I would do my shopping around there, and there was this discount electronics places that sold TV sets and VCRs and cameras and stereo equipment and things like that. Called Standard Sales at the time, and they changed it to Leads, but it kept changing hands as, I don't know, whoever had all the contracts with Tokyo to bring in all this stuff. But that was like the best prices you could find on cameras at that point. And so I went in, and I had my money all together and figured I was all set to go, and I went in to buy my SRT 201. And the salesman says, "You want a Minolta, huh?" I said, "Yeah, I think I like this SRT. This is nice." He said, "Well, this is nice, but Minolta just came out with a new camera, and it's way more popular. And I suggest you get that one." I said, "Well, what is it?" And he says, "It's called the XG7. Can you show it to me?" "No, we sold out of all of them, but we have some coming in 2 weeks." And I said, "Well, I kind of got my heart set on getting this one." He says, "Well, I'll tell you what, you got a 30-day exchange period. Just save the box and the styrofoam and the wrapping and everything, and I'll sell you this one. You bring it back in 2 weeks, and we'll give you full credit towards the XG7 when we get one." And so I said, "All right, well, I'll think about it." So I just kind of said that and just bought my camera, and I was glad that I had my SRT, because that was it. And I didn't really pay much attention to what he was saying, but then I picked up the next issue of Modern Photography, and it had a bunch of stuff about the XG7 in it, and I thought, whoa, that guy was right. This has a lot more stuff on it. And so I put my SRT back in the box and put the lens back in the lens box, closed everything up, and put it on the shelf at home and left it there for 2 weeks. And then I dutifully went back with my camera and the lens, and my receipt, and I returned it, and I got my XG7. And I don't have an XG7 here, but I have what the XG7 was modeled after. This is not an XG7, but from 5 feet away it looks like it is one. This is called the XD11, and this was the pro level Minolta camera of the time, and very advanced, very expensive. This was a $400 camera at the time, and the XG looked just like it, except instead of having this little self-timer button like this, it had a red LED that would flash on and off with your self-timer, and when you hit battery check it would light up and hold a steady red. So this, other than that, this looks very much like an XG7, but they're very different. The XG7 had a plastic top plate. This one is brass, aluminum, black metal on top and bottom, and a full aluminum frame. And this is a very, very fine featured camera. There's my self-timer going off. But I didn't think I was ever going to buy something like an X700 back then. Spent $400 on a camera. Are you kidding me? That was crazy. But my XG, to me, was just as good a thing as I could get. So I got my XG7 and I started taking pictures. I bought an extra lens to it. I bought an auto winder to it, auto winder G, a couple more lenses, and I was really going to town. Oh, I'll show you this. This is the auto winder D for the XD11, but it's the same as the auto winder G. This one thing that was different about Minolta compared to most of the other companies is they didn't have a cover on the winder gear. It's just exposed all the time, and it hooks up to these two little teeth here on the winder, and this pin goes in here and screw thread in there, and then you turn this little thing here, and the auto winder becomes part of the camera, and it winds the film. This doesn't have batteries in it, but it worked on this thing here, so I know that it did work. little light that comes on stays red when you reach the end of the reel to remind you to push this button and reload. But that's it. No handle. This is a 6-volt winder. That means it's got takes 4 AA batteries in it, and it's 2 frames per second, and it does a good job for winding. Today, it's probably a pretty popular accessory, but then in those days, film was really cheap, so we didn't think much about burning through a roll of film, and with your auto winder D or your auto winder G, you could burn through a 36 exposure roll of film in about 18 seconds. And then again, if you had the winder that went on the motor drive that went to the X700, you could go through a 36 exposure roll of film in 10 seconds. And we used to do stuff like that because we could. Cheap film was a few bucks, a couple bucks, and you're all set. So now it's expensive, and we're careful about what we do with every single picture. But that was where I started with the XG, and then after having it for a few years and reading more about cameras and new things coming up with this camera, new from Canon, new from Olympus, new from Pentax, new from Nikon, all these things going on, the XG started to seem kind of mundane to me. It wasn't that it was a bad camera, it was a completely reliable camera. It never messed up an exposure, it never failed to work. Yeah, it failed to have film in it sometimes, and that's about it. It never even, I had it for 5 years, I think, and I still had the same batteries and I never had to change them. It worked just fine. But it was just kind of a mundane little beginner camera, and although, you know, didn't have a lot of advanced features on it, it took pictures just fine. And so I lived with it. A while after I got it, Minolta came out with the XG9, which was like an XG7, but it had the aperture direct readout where you could see what your f-stop was set on your lens when you were looking through the viewfinder. It had the depth of field preview button, which was missing on the XG7, so you can stop down the lens when you look through the viewfinder and see what is going to be in focus in depth of field. It had multiple exposure capability, which the XG7 didn't have. It had metered manual, which is when you took it and set it in manual, when you look in, it still had the LEDs lighting on the suggested shutter speed for your camera. So you could base your decision of your shutter speed from what you saw, what the camera recommended, and what you thought you wanted to do with the picture, lighten it or darken it. So it gave some very nice features that I really thought would be great for my XG7 to move up to an XG9. But I hadn't had the XG7 for very long, and the XG9 was nicer, but it was not perfect. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to hang on to my XG7 for a while longer because Minolta looks like they're going in the right direction. So all I have to do is hang on there until they get to where I want them to get, and then I'll sell my XG7 or do something with it, give it to somebody, and I'll get something that's better than the XG9. And it took a while, until 1983, but Minolta did eventually update the XG9. Now after they came out with the XG9, they came out with the XG1, which was lower than the XG7 and more simplified. And they continued to come out with other low-end models, lower prices, keeping them down to the 200 or below range. And they, instead of an f1.7, they came out with an f2, even slower normal lens for it. But eventually it caught up to them and they came up with something different. And that was the XG7. And this was a big move up. Now, what was the big moves up from the XG7 and the XG9? Well, it incorporated all the features of the XG9 that were additions. I didn't mention the XG7 came in chrome only. The XG9 was chrome, but they made a few also in all black, which looked very professional to us in the day. And it was in the late 70s and early 80s, black cameras were very much in demand because it made us look like pros and professional photographers. So everybody wanted to get a black camera because that's what the pros used. So the saying was for selling cameras. But so when the XG7 came out, it was only available in black. So it was more pro-ish of an amateur camera. Like the XG7, it had a plastic top plate and it had a black plastic bottom cover also. That's not metal, that's plastic down there. I've taken it off and seen. So that's plastic too. The XG7 was metal on the bottom and plastic on the top. And I don't know, they didn't make the XG7 for less than a year. It was not in production, although it was a big hit camera. They moved up pretty quickly. But I don't think that it ever got a plastic bottom plate because they had stopped making it by then and moved up to the XG9 and then to the X700. But the X700 had some real big features on it. First of all, it would work with an auto winder G. It won't work with the auto winder D. It's a little bit different from the locations of stuff, but you could put the 2 frames per second auto winder for your XG7 or your XG1 onto your X700, and it worked just fine, still 2 frames per second. But the big breakthrough from minolta that just thrilled me to death was that the XG7 also gave you the option of using the MD1 minolta motor drive, which was a 12 volt 8 AA cell battery motor drive with a grip handle and a shutter button built into it and another shutter button built over here for holding the camera vertically or in a vertical format, and you had another shutter release there instead of having to wrap your hand around like this to work the shutter like that. So that was comfort that you had those 2 other shutters buttons. Both of them could be turned off, so you didn't accidentally bump it and expose another exposure on it. But with a rubberized grip on the handle and the shutter release on it and the square box down at the bottom, that made this camera look like in all black, like wow, that looks like a Nikon FM with an MD11 on it. And it was a very similar motor drive to the MD11 and MD12. And you could do shutters, you could do a burst, or you can do single shot and set it on that as you could on the Olympus auto winders. Most of the auto winders just had on and off. So it came with the motor drive. Next big thing, and this was a very big thing, and that was flash was changed. When they came out with the XD11 and then the XG7, Minolta came out with its own dedicated 200X electronic flash. And what that did was when you put it on the hot shoe and it made a connection and turned it on, it would give you a flash in your viewfinder. A little red LED would light up to show that the thyristor was fully charged up and the flash was ready to discharge, so you could take a picture. That 200X flash had a setting for 1/16 power, which didn't let you get very far away, but that meant that it used so little power that the flash could synchronize with the 2 frames per second auto winder.